Hey everyone, so I wanted to do some low effort content. But without further ado, welcome to Christian's World of Jazz Nonsense. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is this idea that seems to be floating around that jazz is somehow special or different music that must be learned in a profoundly different way to any other music. And I think one of the reasons why people sort of think this is because a lot of, this is my theory anyway, you might disagree with this, and a lot of jazz education materials that are commonly available, like the big sellers, the Real Book, the Mark Levine Jazz Theory book, things like that, the emphasis is really on what I call kind of prog jazz, progressive jazz, I suppose, you know, like postmodal music, everything after Coltrane. And the Real Book, the original 70s Real Book at least, contains lots of kind of more contemporary charts, often by Berkeley faculty, such as Steve Swallow. Was Steve Swallow on faculty? Actually, I'm not sure. But anyway, Steve Swallow, Carla Bley, Pat Metheny even has a few charts in there, people like that. And then you also get the standards and the bop tunes and so on. But the music is kind of, you know, Chick Corea too. The music's kind of moving more towards that sort of zone, that sort of proggy zone. And as a result, in order to learn that stuff, you kind of need to learn a lot of music theory. So that's one side of it. And I kind of compare it to the rock world, where perhaps if you started off day one with trying to learn the music of Yes, you might be compelled to learn a lot more music theory than if you started with, early Beatles, for instance. In terms of improvisation, a lot of the old improvisers often worked with the tune. So people like, Chet Baker and Stan Getz and Art Pepper were primarily known as tune or melody-oriented improvisers. Or you get people on guitar who work from grips. I'm thinking of Charlie Christian and Herb Ellis and people like that. And it's possible to do quite a lot of that work, ear and grips. I still meet a lot of gypsy jazz guitarists who have learned that way. I think it's more common in that world than it is in the bop world. But I have met some bop players, particularly horn players, who think that way as well. Or at least sort of kind of straight-ahead players. And I kind of think it's worth reminding people, not because I think it's wrong to learn theory, but because it sort of shows that, jazz is a form of music and not a form of higher mathematics. Ultimately it is about learning licks and tunes and melodies and learning your favorite music, just as it would be for any other form of music. And I think that sometimes gets lost in these discussions. And what doesn't help is that I think guitar players are often drawn to jazz through the proggy stuff. So, they hear Frank Gambale playing with Chick Corea, or they get into Alan Holdsworth, or, whatever. And then maybe get back into bebop, starting from that reference point, which gives you a different perspective than if you start with, say, 1930s swing and then move forward into bop. So I think people often think all jazz is essentially prog rock, if that makes any sense. Whereas actually, if we're to compare jazz to rock, then just as in rock, there's many different types of rock. There are many different types of jazz, and you wouldn't necessarily always expect one person to be able to play one thing to be able to play the other. And that's cool. I mean, in practice, most professional jazz musicians graduate from jazz college anyway, where they have exposure to lots of different types of music and music theory. So that kind of changes the equation a bit. But you still meet, autodidacts and kind of street players who have learnt in the older way, and it reminds me that jazz is a form of music, and it's about songs, and it's about, originally it was about dancing, So here's a good one. Transposing ideas on the guitar is a waste of time. So, I can play Anthropology in any key just by moving up the neck. Well, that sort of works. Here it is in B flat. Here it is in, E flat. Let's try that again. Here it is in F. Don't know why that took me by surprise. Actually, weirdly, even just doing that, I'm finding my brain is sort of crapping out a little bit. But maybe that says more about my brain than it does about the exercise. But if you think like these kinds of exercises, these transposing exercises are easy, then maybe you haven't done them enough, because they do. It's weird. I was doing something like transposing a Barry Harris ending through the B section of rhythm changes the other day with a student, and even that can be surprisingly challenging. So, this ending, that one. I mean, I can can do it because I practiced it, right? But what about other octaves? So we could have it up here, of course. We could also have it down here. What about different fingerings? Might not want to play that fingering, but it's good to know where it is. Jazz chords are harder to play than ordinary chords. I mean, I suppose by ordinary chords, I mean chords like this. No, I don't think physically like this is harder to play than this. I think, actually barring is quite hard, especially on an acoustic guitar. I think what is quite hard about jazz chords is the fact that the same shape can operate in multiple contexts. I think that's a big thing. Like, I think if you used to play like that's a D shape, but you've got that one as well, or maybe this one. You've got not too many options, but you're not going to suddenly think of that as being something else. Whereas in jazz, that shape could be perhaps the upper structure of a B-7 chord, or the C bass or something. If you've got a bass player playing the C, that might be a perfectly good shape to play. It looks like a D, but actually it's a C Lydian voicing, or this shape here, 3-note grip, very common with swing guitar. It could be an A-6, but it could also be a D7. But then maybe it could also be an F sharp diminished, or an F sharp half diminished. All these options just for that same intervallic structure. So, I think that's quite hard to get to grips with, but the actual grips are not. That's not hard to play, right? That's not a difficult grip to play. Uptempo means fast. So there's a bit sort of thing like where you'll be playing a gig every so often, and so it's a wedding, and the best man comes up to you and says, "Oh, could you play something uptempo?" And jazz musicians freak out usually. Uptempo often actually is code for like, can you play something top 40 that we can dance to? But in fact, usually in a sort of wider sense, uptempo, for instance, at a restaurant or something, often means actually just something happy and major key that makes everybody feel good. The thing is, jazz musicians tend to have, I think these days, tend to have two settings, which is ballad and up, and actually a lot of the uptempos, even though people aren't dancing necessarily, they won't necessarily feel it because it's too fast. So there's something really nice about, I think, and this is my theory, about a sort of medium tempo swing tune, something like, I Can't Give You Anything But Love, or something like that, which always seems to work. So rather than playing really fast, you're kind of playing a sort of energized swing. But I think most jazz musicians panic and sort of think up-tempo means, Cherokee. That's not what the punters really want, to be honest. The other thing that happens is very often I'm playing gigs and, a couple will get up to dance, and I'll usually do it on something like a medium tempo blues. And, I Can't Give You Anything But Love or something like that. And I've noticed that a lot of the time the band leader seems to think that this is a signal for us to play fast and loud. And the thing is that no, that's not what you need to do. The dancers are telling you that they like the vibe that you are setting. So really, you could maybe take it up a notch in tempo, maybe, but not much, because dancing's a physical activity, and unless you're a competition Lindy hopper or something, you probably don't really want things to get north of about 180 beats a minute, right? Because that's exhausting. And, most dancers, if they have dance lessons, they dance at the tempo. Like in the old days, apparently, according to Barry Harris, he used to cut the tempo down the middle. So if the tune was at 240, they dance at 120. People don't really do that now. So keep the tempos gentle if you have dancers. People want to move to the music, and if they've got to do that, it's too much. So don't be afraid of medium tempo. I think a lot of jazz musicians are afraid of medium tempo because they sort of see it as being kind of like the graveyard of the jazz workshop, where everybody just plays medium tempo because they can't play fast and they can't really play slow. So it's kind of everything ends up at 140 beats a minute. This is nothing to do. Like playing a medium bounce is itself an art form, and I'm glad that I've played for enough dancers that I think I've developed some affinity with medium tempo. I do like it, and I like rhythm sections that can feel it. But it's surprising how rarely these tempos are played, and they're beautiful tempos. So don't be afraid of a medium swing. The last thing I want to talk about is people often talk as if there's such a thing as cheating in music. And again, I find that really interesting. So there is no cheating in music. Whatever you do that sounds good is good. So if I'm in the middle of a tune and I play, I quote the melody or something, over a difficult set of chords, or I just sit out and play chords for 4 bars over the difficult bit. The joke is that you can hear like some of the best jazz musicians ever doing this when they don't know a tune very well, and nobody really picks up on it because it sounds great. So a lot of it is like pick your battles, right? So if you've got like 4 bars of like a C minor vamp, well, obviously, hopefully you'll be able to have something to play with a C minor vamp. But if you suddenly get these like weird changes, or you could just play that. You just play the chords. Whatever it happens to be, I don't know. I just made that up anyway. Obviously, it won't work for giant steps because you can't just play the chords for like a whole solo. But very often, like for tunes where you're just like, I don't really know that bit. What happens? You can often hear like some of the more experienced players either just playing the chords if they're piano players, or playing the melody if they're horn players over that bit, and it never sounds bad to do that. So that's just one example, but. Like things like I've been teaching some students like more melody-oriented ways to approach soloing. So instead of worrying about the chords, something like All the Things You Are, you might maybe it's a bad example actually. All of Autumn Leaves, something like that. You might instead choose to might embellish the melody, and the more you embellish it, the more kind of improvised it will sound, or more improvised it will be, I guess. But people often sort of look at that and think like, well, I'm not thinking of the chords, isn't that cheating? And the answer is no. Well, you don't have to think about the chords if you don't want to. Neither do you have to play every chord in the tune. And I think there is a sort of a side of it which is fair enough, because people feel that they want to advance as players. And yes, I mean, practicing lots of chord changes and challenging sequences and so on will develop you as a player, absolutely, and learning all your chord scales and everything else. That's good stuff to do. But in actual music, like anything you need to do, the late Duncan Lamont wrote a book called The Street Fighter's Guide to Improvisation, which I always liked as a title. It's like, it's not martial arts. It's not, it's horrible metaphor really, but like your street fighter is going to grab something and hit their opponent with it. It's like they're not going to be doing all these sort of beautiful kind of like martial arts moves. It's going to be pragmatic because you want to survive, and that's Duncan Lamont's thinking. And things like this are street fighting approaches to playing. But even like improvising on melody, well, many horn players did that. There's a famous quote from Lester Young that like, never told me the changes. I suppose it relates back to our initial point about, how people might have learnt music by ear, learned to play jazz by ear in previous generations, and even today, actually. The improvising on the melody thing requires a lot less theoretical background. But a lot of people go like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. It's like, well, who cares if it sounds good? So this idea of there being like cheating in music is, I think, a bit silly. There isn't, there is no cheating in music. You only have your skills and your know-how and the hacks and tricks which you have to get the job done. And if you have a good poker face, which is another important thing for being a musician, I think, then nobody will ever know.